In 1910, Europe appeared to be a continent at its peak. Its major cities were thriving, its empires were vast, and streets like these in Paris were humming with the innovation of early automobiles moving alongside horse-drawn carriages. But as this map of the region's treaties shows, the continent was highly militarized and strictly divided into two massive defensive blocs. On one side, you had the Triple Entente, France, Russia, and Britain. On the other, the Triple Alliance, Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. On June 28, 1914, all of that hidden continent-wide tension focused down to a single street corner in the city of Sarajevo. Visiting the city that day was Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the direct heir to the Austria-Hungarian Empire. Waiting in the crowd was a 19-year-old nationalist named Gavrilo Princip. As the Archduke's open-top car rolled past, Princip stepped forward and fired two fatal shots. Political assassinations were relatively common at the time, but Europe was wired with strict interlocking defense treaties. This local murder became the specific trigger required to ignite a conflict across the entire continent. Within weeks, Austria-Hungary retaliated by officially declaring war on Serbia. Because of the alliance system, a massive chain reaction began. Russia mobilized its military to defend Serbia. Germany responded by declaring war on Russia, and then immediately turned its sights on France. When German troops crossed into Belgium, Britain was pulled into the fight. In the span of a single month, diplomacy completely collapsed. The dispute in the Balkans had rapidly pulled the major powers into full continent-wide mobilization. Millions of young men were quickly organized, uniformed, and marched out to the newly forming front lines. The strict design of the alliance system ensured that once the first mobilization began, the rest of the continent's powers were bound to follow. By late 1914, the quick, decisive victories both sides expected failed to materialize. Across the Western Front, stretching from the North Sea down to the Swiss border, the armies ground to a deadly halt. To survive constant bombardment, soldiers dug in. They carved hundreds of miles of deep, muddy trenches into the earth, leaving a barren, uncrossable expanse between them, known as no man's land. Military leadership was completely unprepared for this reality. Generals were sending dense lines of infantry charging across open ground, a tactic straight from the 1800s directly into the teeth of 20th century machinery. That machinery was devastatingly efficient. New heavy machine guns could fire over 600 rounds per minute, and by 1915, poison gas was introduced, suffocating men right in their defensive positions. But the dominant destructive force of the conflict was heavy artillery. Constant, deafening shelling shattered the landscape and was responsible for In total, over 70 million soldiers from more than 30 countries were mobilized, pulling colonial populations into a war thousands of miles from their homes. By 1917, after 3 years of relentless attrition, both the Entente and Central Powers were exhausted. Mutinies were breaking out, and domestic economies were failing. Then the United States formally entered the conflict. They brought a massive, untouched industrial base and millions of fresh soldiers directly to the European lines. Injecting a fully mechanized superpower into the Entente ranks tipped the scales. The Central Powers simply could not sustain their war effort against this overwhelming wave of manpower and materiel. Germany's final offensives collapsed under the sheer weight of this combined force. Starving at home and outgunned on the front lines, the German government signed an armistice. On November 11, 1918, the guns finally stopped firing. The physical and human toll was difficult to comprehend. Vast stretches of European infrastructure were reduced to ash. Over 16 million people were dead, and another 20 million carried the physical and mental wounds. This map shows the total collapse of the Old World Order. The massive Austro-Hungarian, Ottoman, Russian, and German empires fractured into a patchwork of disjointed, unstable new nations. The Allied victors drafted the Treaty of Versailles to punish Germany, imposing massive financial reparations and strict territorial losses. But rather than securing a lasting peace, the punitive terms crippled the German economy and bred deep resentment. The armistice ended the fighting, but it left the underlying geopolitical tensions intact. Humanity had discovered the cost of modern industrial conflict, while the punitive treaty conditions created the specific economic pressures that would lead to another war 20 years later.